No, it's not just 5 Native American tribes. In fact, I'm going to be banning South America, North America, and the Australia-Oceania areas, since those 3 are frankly big and painful enough to fill this list of top 5 individually. Look, I know that statistically someone out there is a massive Mapuche tribe enjoyer. Look at that, 5% discipline and 20% trade steering. But yeah, that person just isn't me. And as such, we're actually looking at real countries located in real parts of the world that people actually play in, to ask the question, what are some incredibly painful starts? As always, for these top 5s, we'll be increasing in pain for these starts each time, starting from almost playable, but let's be honest, still very painful, and ending on the most painful. Finally, in regards to Siberian and native New Zealand tribes specifically, they seem bad on first glance, but they can specifically farm infinite or near infinite monarch points from their show strength truth breaking ability with forcing migration CP, which means that they don't count, and I'll also be honest, all of our entries today are going to be starting as subjects. Look, the title didn't say anything about being independent at the start, just 1444 EU4 start. Therefore, if this country exists and they're valid, they're on the list. It just so happens that starting as a subject is really bad. With that all said, before we get into the video itself, just a quick pit stop to say that a like would be appreciated and a subscription would be incredible. But enough self-shitting, let's get right into the Caucasus Mountain nation of Karabakh. Karabakh starts the game as a subject of Karakoyunlu. Karakoyunlu is an interesting nation to be a subject of, because while eventually it does tend to get conquered by the Ottomans and the Timurids or whatever power emerges out of Persia, at the very start of the game, the Timurids are busy killing a Jam, and the Ottomans are busy killing IQ. What this means is that until around the 1460s, 1470s, they're actually pretty untouched. A pretty good thing for them if you are playing as Karakoyunlu, as you have at least a little bit of a free game before you have to start dealing with the Ottomans or the Timurids. However, in our case, this means that they have plenty of time to annex you, and you're not going to be able to rely on Timurid or Ottoman or frankly even Mamluk support that consistently for your independence war. Karakoyunlu also starts in a relatively strong position, with 17k troops just in the field day 1, and your force limit of 3 combined with an economy of 1.04 ducats, yeah, you're going to have a pretty hard time fighting them. Furthermore, your opening Armenia ideas don't exactly have anything that helps you fight. Plus 2% missionary strength and 10% dev cost are not bad ideas on their own, but considering that they are your early ideas and early on you need to try and survive, that's not going to be too helpful. On the open at least you do have some monthly war exhaustion, which is not going to help you win battles, but recovery army morale speed can be at least somewhat helpful, although as an OPM if you lose a battle it's kind of over for you already. Nevertheless, it's at least something in the military buffs category, and the fact that you at least start with somewhat of a defensible terrain in your highlands, combined with the fact that you are Coptic for some extra fort defense bonuses, you have at least some small things going for you. Another reason that this is nation number 5 on our list is that indeed while the situation is pretty dire, a Jam and AQ don't tend to die immediately. This gives you at least a little bit of a window to try and secure some support independences to move against Karakoyunlu. I've also observed, and this is pretty lucky in this case, that sometimes, but not always, Karakoyunlu does go ahead and rival the Mamluks. And if they do, this can give you an extra opportunity to go ahead and grab another support independence from Karakoyunlu's rival. Although, again, not that much of an easy free win. It's still quite painful and an uphill battle. Certainly if you're playing in this area and going for Persia, and you want to play someone small, I'd certainly suggest Ardabil over Karabakh, but it's an option. And while Armenian Ideas is a default idea set of Armenian ideas, so it's not like a unique set, although let's be honest, it's kind of unique since there's not many Armenian idea sets in the area, you at least actually have a mission tree, which is pretty neat. It's not that big, but it's sizable and has stuff going for it. So Pei, you're at least conceptually meant to at least attempt this, but no, I would in no way, shape or form suggest actually playing Karabakh. The start is painful. If you're playing Coptic, it's better off to flip into a Coptic nation than start as Karabakh, and in general, no. I think that's a pretty fair summary for this tag, but it's not the worst. You at least have some counterplay options. It can definitely be much worse than Karabakh's starting position in terms of access to independence, and indeed that's what we're going to observe with our next nation. As country number 2 on our list is going to be that of Ligor. They're going to start as a subject of Ayutthaya. Now technically Ayutthaya, if we look at them, day 1 start with cores on their northern subject of Sukhothai, and I would use to argue that Sukhothai was actually this number 1 worst country to start with. But they're not the winner, and also not even selected here, because Sukhothai now has access to an event which has an option in around 1447, 1448, if you're the player, to decide to administer the country of Ayutthaya from your capital. And if you decide that, it's going to cede these 2 provinces, so your full state, as well as this state to you, and make the rest of Ayutthaya your subject. Doing so naturally makes it no longer the hardest start in the game, or anything close to it. And as such, Sukhothai is no longer on that list. Instead, I've selected Ligure. Now, Ligure has a couple things going for it. It actually has 3 provinces and something that resembles an economy, as you have 29 starting development, which is not awful. And while yes, a third of your country is Sunni and Malayan, at least you have access to it, right? This means you are actually making 2.3 ducats and have some force limit, although some is 5, going up to 8 when you no longer are a subject. With that said, you might be thinking, why don't I grab Langzan and Khmer or any other subjects to support my independence against Ayutthaya? And if you do that, that's going to be a one-way ticket towards annexation. See, one of the other reasons that Sukhothai was such a miserable tag to play was that if you went for an independence war against Ayutthaya, what would happen is the Ming would get involved, as Ayutthaya is a subject of the Ming, and you are not a Ming tributary as a vassal of Ayutthaya, meaning that if you declared an independence war on Ayutthaya, you would have the Ming called in against you as you are attacking their tributary. Now, this is no longer the case. If Ligure declares independence war on Ayutthaya, Ming no longer steps in, and you're thinking, okay, that makes this independence war quite easy. I just grab Langzan and Khmer to support me, and it'll be an easy win. However, if we check here for ask to support independence, as you can see here on Khmer, they would have to fight the tributary overlord. There's a default minus 50% for asking to support independence for having to fight tributary overlord, because if you call anyone else into your war against Ayutthaya, so that is, you're not going in alone, you actually have allies, now Ming is going to be able to step in. As such, meaning that either you fight Ming and you bring in your own friends, or you fight Ayutthaya and I guess their allies one-on-one. And I'd suggest that whatever allies you can get here, they're not going to be as good as Ming, so maybe sit out allies on this one. But it does mean that your best case scenario is going up against Ayutthaya alone, and that's a pretty hefty proposition. You are also blessed with the default mission tree, although you have some of the East Asian default missions like the Silk Road and the Spice Trade, so that's something, I guess. And you do actually have unique ideas, which are very good at keeping your subjects loyal, with minus 20% liberty desire in subjects, an extra dip rep, and 20% liberty desire from subjects development, meaning that if you ever do get subjects of your own, you'll be able to keep them super loyal. And naturally, this combines really well with your Mandala system of government, which gives you extra income from vassals and vassal force limit contribution, meaning that you can really keep your subjects loyal. Very helpful for you at game start because, you know, you are a subject. Nevertheless, at least you can enjoy 5% discipline from your current karma, but yeah, it's an uphill battle, and certainly a difficult tag to work with. With that said though, compared to other nations on the list, again, you at least have 3 provinces. 3 grassland, very undefensible provinces, but you know, 3 provinces and a dream. And while indeed Ayutthaya does tend to dominate this local region, and if you leave them too late, they will expand and annex you, I'd also find that you have a little bit more time to work with compared to the normal starts. And furthermore, I think with Ayutthaya and this tag specifically, you have the highest chance of just getting lucky and having Ayutthaya die to AI or something random like that, giving you a free win on the start. But I won't be counting on it, which means for that reason it's going to be earning its spot as the number 4 nation for most painful starts. Nevertheless though, let's move on to number 3. And for that, we make our way over to Europe, to the Duchy of Naxos. Naxos begins the game as a vassal of Venice, and despite being on an island, meaning that you may consider, oh, I'll just take naval and maritime ideas and win, the reality of the situation is that Venice is going to integrate you well before that becomes an option. Even if by some miracle you do stave off your integration until you can do that, you're up against the naval prowess of Venice. And certainly the Venetian navy is inherently defeatable, but not if you're an OPM vassal. Venice also has just gained, and I say just gained relatively recently I guess, an entirely new mission tree. And this mission tree is pretty strong, the consequence of which means that Venice tends to survive a lot more than they often did, as Venice I'd find had around a 50% time annexation coming from Austria. This time though, post update and mission tree, I find that Venice sticks around for a lot more than that, so hey, good news for them. But still, you're an island nation trying to find an independence war against a premier naval power in the Mediterranean. Good luck. Now, there is a little bit of an optional counterplay here. See, Venice does tend to come into conflict early on with the Ottomans, and anyone fighting the Ottomans can give you a free win sometimes. Unfortunately, that can also come to your detriment, because the Ottomans also tend to desire to annex you from day one. So you'll be trading a Venetian annexation for an Ottoman one half the time that you actually get them to support your independence, if you can manage that at all. After all, you're not in the same religion group and you don't exactly have a strong army or navy. And the opinion debuff from them desiring your land certainly doesn't help. To top it all off, compared to other subjects like Athens, which also have a difficult time, well, Athens can go ahead and grab Byzantium early and basically play the game as a budget Byzantium. You don't have that option. Your early wars are against Venice. And if you do manage to, by some miracle, death war and beat up Venice for a province or two and actually gain your independence, congratulations, the Ottomans are probably going to turn around and also pulverize you into the void. I guess eventually you can set up some kind of counterplay here, and they're not the worst nation on this list, because Venice isn't technically the worst possible nation to have as a subject. Venice tends to have a lot of enemies, meaning, hey, maybe Bohemia decides to save you, but I won't count on it. Or the Pope. Hey, that's the Pope's an option. So theoretical counterplay exists, but don't expect the Papal Navy to do anything against the Venetian Navy. But backhanded compliments aside, what Naxos actually does have going for them is they have the Crusader mission tree, so that's something. Hey, you can get the Ark of the Covenant if you survive that long. And finally, the Naxos ideas I think are very cool. They're not strong at all, but I think are cool. +4 tolerance of heretics is pretty unique and quite rare, especially seeing numbers that big. It's not good, but it's unique. And diplomatic annexation cost is a nice thing to have if you're stacking around that. Cost to fabricate claims also doesn't hurt, although I won't exactly call it good. What is interesting at least is morale hit when losing a ship, because that's actually a pretty big bonus for prolonged naval fighting. Not that you can afford prolonged naval fighting, mind you, but it's there. And hey, 10% galley combat ability and 20 naval force modifier means that you can at least get a budget fighting the Venice kind of navy going, but yeah, again, not enough. And look at that, embargo efficiency. Whoa, slow down there, Paradox. You're making these guys a bit too strong. But no, at least you have 10% CCR rounding off the idea set, which no one can complain about. I understand, of course, that Naxos is a bit of a remnant of the Latin Empire, and the Latin Empire isn't exactly university-liked after what they did to Byzantium. But hey, it's a campaign option, and you at least have missions. And look, you can go ahead and fortify Malta, that's something. Actually, there's a pretty big debuff on Malta if anyone's ever trying to invade you, as that 50% defensiveness can stack with the Malta forts for local defensiveness again, making this a really miserable place to siege. But no, it's unique and has some cool stuff going for it, but the reality of the situation is most of the time you're not going to see it because you're going to get integrated, whether into Venice or the Ottomans. That I'm not sure, but it's going to be one of those two. So yeah, certainly a tough spot, but not as tough as the next spot on our list, and that's going to go to Rostov, the smallest and dare I say weakest of the Russian principalities under Muscovy. Now, Muscovy is a very weird country to come up against in the early game, because who exactly is fighting them in the early game? The Hordes have a decent chance of beating up Muscovy early, but it has to be early, like pre-Miltech 6 early, I think, as Muscovy very quickly outscales them. And they do this because Novgorod is basically the epitome of free land at this point. Lithuania, more often than not, gets PU'd by Poland, making any kind of support independence from Lithuania disappear, and Sweden tends to be a bit busy with Denmark and Norway and all of that going on over there. Even in the scenarios where you do get Lithuania and Sweden to support your independence, Muscovy honestly tends to just beat them both back anyway. They have a plethora of loyal subjects, outside of you, I guess, give them quite a powerful vassal swarm, and the Muscovite and followed by Russian missions are just really, really strong, as well as Muscovite ideas are, again, one of the top tier premier great power ideas. They are very, very powerful. It's an uphill battle all the way around. And with basically no early enemies, Muscovy is going to have very few issues in terms of consolidating and then just annexing you. See, Muscovy encounters issues by the later game. When Sweden finally breaks free from Denmark or Denmark integrates Sweden, eventually a power from Scandinavia can challenge them. The Commonwealth, if formed, will eventually by Tech 10 also present a bulwark in the east, and as Muscovy eats up the hordes and starts going into their Siberian adventures, eventually a power from Persia or a power from China can emerge to actually threaten Muscovite existence. By the time all of this happens, you've been annexed and are no longer in the game. This means you have to fight Muscovy early, and even if you're playing as Novgorod, the war against Muscovy is surprisingly not trivial. Muscovy is able to field a surprisingly strong army, and opening plus 10% shock damage early on is actually quite strong. In essence, good luck. This is a miserable war and a miserable scenario to fight and win in, and the lack of friends and early abilities to gain any kind of leeway or, frankly, help against the Muscovite is going to make this miserable for you. The best time to strike would be an environment where you get the Lithuanians to support your independence, and Muscovy is in the middle of a Novgorod war. That could sometimes help. Or if Kazan decides to, for whatever reason, go early on into Muscovy, but not too early, because if it is just Kazan versus Muscovy, Muscovy does just win that. You need a lot of stars to align to even have a chance. And when you do, well, Muscovy tends to, I find, if you actually start winning against it, drop the war against Novgorod pretty quickly and then focus down on you. And if they do decide to focus down on you, you are a grassland 8 development grain province. You're not going to hold out for long. No highlands in the Caucasus for you, right? In essence, it's just an absolutely miserable start to actually partake in. You do have access to Russian Principality missions. They're not that much help, because the first thing is go expand, here's a claim on Russia, and go become independent and expand, here's some stability, legitimacy, and more claims on Russia. Look, Rostov doesn't need claims, it needs a miracle. And hey, at least you have 4 force limit, not 3, because of the grain on Rostov. But yeah, that's not going to be enough against Muscovites starting armies of 27,000, all of their vassal swarms, and hey, even larger force limit. Again, 1444 Muscovy has access to 36 force limit, almost 10 times your starting army. Put simply, this is an absolutely miserable fight, and the fact that Muscovy does also tend to just keep all of their subjects loyal, yeah, you're not going to be winning this anytime soon. There is one positive saving grace, and it's not a directly positive saving grace. It doesn't help you win or make this less painful to start, but Rostov is one of the few nations in the game that actually starts with minus 10% idea cost of the open. And this is really good, because this 10% idea cost is actually going to help you fill out ideas for the rest of the game, or at least until you form Russia and get some different ideas. Nevertheless, starting with idea cost is really good, because starting with 10% idea cost, or even having it within the first 1 or 2 ideas, is significantly stronger than having it near the end, which is where most idea costs I tend to find are located. So 10% idea cost right off the bat is an excellent bonus. It's just not going to be too helpful in your survivability as Rostov. And the actual idea set is very good for scaling, with both 10% construction cost and 10% dev cost being included. You also pick up 10% trade efficiency and 10% production efficiency for your economy. Nothing here is absolutely insane, but it's just good solid bonuses. Finally, you also have access to a dip reputation and a diplomat, so even that kind of single-player gaming isn't bad, especially once you consider the tolerance of true faith for unrest reductions and aggressive expansion impact. Now, the aggressive expansion impact is pretty good, just not in the Russia area. If you conquer this thing, literally no one cares, I promise. I mean, I was actually thinking about this, but I've genuinely never seen a coalition originate inside of the Russia area. You've got a bunch of hordes that are wrong culture, wrong religion, they don't care what happens to you. Meanwhile, Muscovy is basically just the one nation in the area. So either Muscovy's in a coalition against you, or there's no Muscovy in a coalition against you. I mean, either have a coalition of Muscovy or a coalition of no one. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Rostov is absolutely miserable. And while you technically have a ray of hope, or more specific, desire to exist to abuse the 10% idea cost off the bat, no, this is absolutely miserable and absolutely painful. Rostov, not a suggestion. Let's just put it that way. But that's only second on our list. How does it get worse than Rostov? Well, for that, we need to get ourselves into northern Sri Lanka, to the nation of Jaffna. So, let's begin with the positives. You have a cool cow on your flag, and you have a very nice orange map color. This concludes the positive section. You begin the game as an OPM vassal of Vijayanagar. I'm going to call them VJ from this point onwards, because if I continue to attempt to pronounce Indian names, I will get hate mail from Indian nationalists. Nevertheless, Jaffna begins with generic South Indian ideas, including 10% production efficiency and massive military buff you'll need to win your independence war, as well as 33% religious unity. An actually not awful bonus, but unfortunately entirely wasted because you're 100% Hindu, so this does nothing. I could laugh at the rest of their ideas like 20% trade range, 10% tax, 10% manpower, or even minus 15% mercenary maintenance, but let's be honest, you're not going to be seeing these ideas. You also have access to the generic default Indian missions, which don't even have awful things inside of them, like 2.5 discipline temporarily here, as well as some core creation costs you can pop for 25 years, which isn't inherently awful. At the same time though, let's be honest, this mission that changes a government rank to a duchy does require in the previous mission for you to own half of central India, so I think you'll probably be a duchy by that point anyway. But yeah, you have pretty much nothing going for you. At least you're Hindu, that's 5% discipline, I guess, and some siege ability, but so is your primary enemy and overlord. And here's the problem with VJ as your overlord, is that these guys basically never lose the game by default. What I mean to say is they're going to win the Bahmanis fight. Bahmanis already starts with less troops than VJ. VJ, however, has some free wins over these little tribes in the south that they can move into and annex for extra expansion, and they also just start with more troops and manpower. But this difference is deceptive. And the reason this difference is deceptive is that Bahmanis actually gets an event early on, which gives them a bunch of autonomy in their land, absolutely crippling them for the upcoming 1-to-1 fight against Vijayanagar. And unfortunately for you, Bahmanis is basically the only one that can even attempt to save you, and most of the time they do fail doing that. In essence, once 190 opinion is achieved with you, you're getting annexed and there's not much getting out of it. And your 6th development Jungle Gem province is not going to be enough to save you. And if you're thinking, maybe I can build a navy to blockade the Strait Crossing, well, you have 6 naval force limit, and Vijayanagar starts with 3 heavy ships. You are a 6th development jungle province trying to stand up to a nation that starts with 263 development, a development count so high for 1444 that they're just 6 development away from being a great power. What's even more frustrating is that even if you do by some miracle get Bahmanis to assist you, realistically, you can't actually help Bahmanis win the war by timing battles or doing anything, as you will be unable to cross the strait. So all that you'll be able to really do is just sit there and watch as Bahmanis dies to Vijayanagar, crippling your hopes and dreams in the process. As Bahmanis dies, they'll be the only people that can truly resist your independence. And technically, I've seen that Orissa can sometimes also be in the mood to support you, depending on their rivalries against Vijayanagar. In this case, yeah, they've rivaled, so they might be interested in supporting your independence. Again, a not trivial task, but if you do actually get yourself to the point where that happens, Orissa's also just going to dive to Vijayanagar. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. But hey, if you manage to survive as Jaffna, you get a cool cow and an orange map color. Which, I mean, that has to go for something. But before I leave the video off, I guess I'll issue you a challenge. Play as Jaffna, don't form any other nation, you're welcome to complete your Conquest of India mission tree, and actually conquer India. Please own the entirety of the India subcontinent, basically uniting it as Jaffna. I would call it the opposite of the trivial task, and for extra style points, although this is optional, keep your capital in your starting province the whole time. If you manage to achieve this goal, feel free to go to my Discord and flex your save. I'd prefer if it's Iron Man, so I know you didn't cheat, and then hey, I'll give you a fancy roll for your achievement. Good luck, and enjoy that extra merchant you get from finishing your ideas. But with that said, that is all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Lemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, and Hatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best for Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Sov, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napa, Glorious Leader, Frankie, Yukata, Danray, Private Claw, Jack, Marvy, Conspiracy Pizza, and Lebarule.